Hello and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to confidence in starting and growing your business. My guest this week is Steve Dineen, founder and Chief Storyteller at Fuse Universal, one of the pioneers of digital learning and knowledge sharing in the workplace. Now, Steve's entrepreneurial journey stretches right back to the early days of e-learning, long before online learning platforms, AI tools and creator content became part of everyday business life. Across multiple ventures, he's helped shape how organisations think about learning, communication and expertise at scale. But what makes this conversation especially interesting, in my opinion, is the way Steve thinks. He thinks fast, talks fast and makes connections quickly, constantly looking for patterns, problems and possibilities. And one of the most fascinating moments in our discussion comes when he talks about the difference between improving something customers already know they want and solving problems that they don't realise they have. It's a mindset that he compares to the famous Steve Jobs idea that customers might ask for a better version of what already exists, but entrepreneurs sometimes need to imagine something entirely different. So, as always, I asked Steve to go right back to the beginning, to those early influences, the first sparks of entrepreneurship, and the experiences that convinced him that he probably wasn't built for corporate life.
I think it's probably more my parents. I think, my parents were entrepreneurs. So, I think every kid, if you ask most kids what they're going to be when they grow up and they're 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, or even a little bit later, they don't know, right? And therefore, they're probably replicating what their parents do. So I think in my head, it was always I wanted to probably run my business. I think that was a part. Probably being around, at the school I was at, I'd imagine other kids have got parents that are entrepreneurs. I mean, my kids now, are at school and we've moved recently to Portugal, to Cascais, and they're at a school where, a lot of people like me I probably wanted a slightly different lifestyle. And I imagine my kids are around other kids whose parents are entrepreneurs. So I think that peer types thing has a big part. I think also when I worked for my first big company, I realized that maybe my personality wasn't tuned into big company. What I mean by that is I think that I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve and I tend to be quite open with my thoughts and mindset. And I realized that people who did that in a company, irrespective of how smart or successful they were, politics is a thing that I didn't really understand until I got there and I saw how they were treated. And I recognized pretty early on that with the openness that I have to speak my mind, at some point that's going to get me in trouble. So I probably am not fitted for big companies. So I think that perspective changed my mind quite quickly.
So did they kind of mark you as T for trouble? This Dineen guy, we're never going to tame him.
I think more myself, really. I think more myself. I mean, the first company I worked for, I had a brilliant boss that brought me in, and he was a great mentor for me. And he was an entrepreneur, and he sold his company to a bigger company that came in. But I was, and I worked really, really super hard. Got promoted after a couple of months. Got promoted again. Was given amazing opportunities, and was doing great. He was doing really, really, really well inside there. But there was an incident when I realized a bit about myself, when I thought there was a moral right and wrong thing, and it was like a little typical story. It was I was working in a pre-sales function between sales and the tech team, and I got on with everyone. The sales guys were helping. Sorry, the techie guys were helping the sales guys to sell a range of products that day in a promotion, and I was passing messages back and forth and getting answers. And when it came to the reward and the pizza at the end of the day, the sales guy didn't want to share it with the engineers, and I was like, no, it was a right and wrong thing, but I couldn't let it go, right? So, and not in a bad way, but I was like, no, we should give them pizza. And then the sales guys were arguing with me, even though we got on. They took it to their sales manager and argued to the sales manager. They took me to the VP of sales, and I was still arguing with the sales manager director why the right thing to do was to share the pizza with the other people. And eventually they went to my boss, who was a VP, and he goes, Steve, here's 50 quid, just go and get some pizza for the team. But it was that, and I think the next day the MD walked up to me and said, hey, Steve, fancy some pizza? And I think it was that moment of recollection, thinking, I'm going to get myself in trouble at some point, right? So I think it was, you see how other people were treated and my natural personality, and I think maybe that's not the right fit.
Okay, so now feeling you don't belong somewhere is different from knowing where you do belong. So I mean, you talked about your parents there and being entrepreneurs. Did you immediately think, yes, I need to set up my own business, or were there a few stages in between?
Well, I think I set my first company up at 25 years old. So I left corporate experience and started at 25, and I had two jobs each for 18 months before I did it. Both were, I had a great experience in both companies. And, in the second company, I was a technical trainer, And the more exams, the more knowledge you had, the more you got paid. And by 25, I was like, I think I passed like 100 exams as the most qualified person in Europe, right? So, it wasn't a case of not kind of fitting or working there. But there was a comfortableness, though, I think, there's a comfortableness, I think, of being an entrepreneur because my parents were. So it's something I saw
Mm.
every day.
Yeah.
So, and I saw how my mum worked and my dad worked, and there was nothing scary about that, right? I think maybe people haven't seen it, it seems a bit more scary. I think the big first thing is, what's your big idea, right? So if you're going to go and start by yourself, what's the idea? And that's probably the first big barrier, right?
Right. Okay. So, what was your first big idea? I know that you were good. You're doing Fuse Universal now, but as I understand it, you founded Fuel in the mid 90s first. Is that right? Is that the first
Just a
company?
little bit before that. So my first company was me and a partner. So it was called CCSD, which was our initial. So to flip a coin to see who came first. And initially, I was going to try and set up a similar company to the ones I was working at, right, and to be an official, training company. And my first boss at my first company said, "Like, I'll back you and I'll help you get the badge and stuff towards that," right, which was really cool. But then actually my second company I was working for heard what I was thinking of doing, obviously weren't overly happy with that, but were still said to me, look, rather than do that, why don't you freelance back to us, the two of you? We'll pay you a better rate, 10 days a month each, because we really need your skill set. And then you can build your new company that doesn't directly compete with us, doing something different, right? For the other 20 days between the two of you. So that was an amazing opportunity. I think that reduced the risk in that early part, and allowed us to slightly pivot to what that first business was at. And the first business, we'd already seen what was happening, the first problem, if we like that, because I think every business needs to start with what's the problem you're trying to solve in the world, right? That you think you can do better than everyone, better than anyone else, or as good as someone else, right? And the problem we had at the time, back in the day, was you had all these different certifications from Novella and Microsoft and Cisco and so forth. And when a company like a Canon or a Xerox or a British Telecom wanted to learn about IT and networking and learn how do their products connect to that world, with different roles from CEOs to sales to engineers, their only real answer towards that was go and buy each individual manufacturer certification for all those people, which is a lot of training and a lot of money. Because I'd passed all those exams and all that knowledge was in my head and my partner's head, we had the ability to customize something specifically for a Xerox or a Canon or a British Telecom with the knowledge inside our heads and create bespoke curriculum for those different audiences. And literally, we were creating it for engineers to sales staff to CEOs and leadership teams, teaching them about the networking technology, IT, and so forth. So I think the problem, we had a clear problem that we could solve. And at the same time, there was a dearth of people like us who could actually run the official certification programs. So we ended up creating that first business, which was a customized courseware and delivery organization, and also an outsourcer. When people wanted to run the official stuff, we would also sell our time back, and then we'd actually get other people to leave their companies and sell them to other
Yeah.
companies who needed that part, right? So that was a really successful business that then we, was generating a couple million turnover, healthily profitable, saw us into the birth of, the early stages of the internet and technology, where, as an innovator and as a techie geek and education geek, I was really excited upon how I could see technology would change education. And then
Mm.
we pivoted the business from mainly face-to-face business, and eventually it became a pure digital business. But the first business was basically creating digital content and e-learning content and being an e-learning content producer. That was the pivot from face-to-face training. And the problem, I guess, then I was trying to solve was, how do I scale greatness? I
Yeah.
had these 20 trainers who were brilliant, and I could sell them at a certain day rate, but you couldn't scale that. I couldn't see how I could scale that to 100 people and scale
Yeah.
the business and keep growing the business. So the problem I could see, and I could see that the demand for that knowledge was much greater than the people we had. So I
Yeah.
was very interested in how could technology allow us to scale great training.
Yeah. So let's press the pause button there, because the question that comes into my mind is, you just kind of threw in, we did a couple million turnover on that business, and there we go. And to a lot of people
Yeah.
listening, that
Yeah.
would be, our kind of core audience, would be going, oh God, that happened quickly, and
Yeah.
so on.
Yeah.
What was it that helped you in that phase? I mean, from my sort of experience of you, so you think quickly, you talk quickly. Do you decide quickly? Do you just kind of make a decision and just go, and then not worry too much about the consequences? Because a lot of people agonize about decisions. Was it just decision, 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 which kind of helped you along?
A bit of both, right? I think a bit of both. I tend to think a lot. Go for walks, talk to people, talk to AI these days. So I think a lot, but I definitely make decisions quickly. And as an entrepreneur CEO, I think you have to, right? So I think quick decision making, not like stupid knee jerk. I mean, you don't want to be knee jerk decision making, but I think once you're clear in your mind, then go, right? I think absolutely. Once you have clarity and you've thought it through, then there's no reason to delay and to get through. But you still got to think things through, but never, I think, procrastinate. I think on it too long before you go forward.
Okay, so but your characters that you predominantly think about what could go right rather than what could go wrong. Is that fair or not?
I think you have to think about both. I think you have to think about both, right? I mean, I'm motivated by success rather than by failure. But when things aren't going right, then you don't want the dream to end. So you got to focus on what could go wrong, right? You
Yeah.
can't just live a happy path, right? If you plan, you've got a happy path, right? And that's what you want to run at, and you make the plan for the happy path. But you as an entrepreneur, I think you've got to have a plan B, C, D, right, in case the happy path
Yeah.
doesn't happen. So you've got to be cognizant that your perfect plan is unlikely to work, and the old Mike Tyson adage, everyone's got a plan till I punch you in the face, right? No plan is ever perfectly executed against what you thought. So having those plan CDs, thought through to some degree, that allows you to pivot and flex and so forth is critical.
Okay, so I pressed the pause button just to ask you about that. Let's start the play button again. So what happened then? Was that the founding of Fuel, or was there anything else
Yeah,
after that? Yeah.
no. So I think so. What I was again, I think there's different ways you innovate, right? And I think it's been interesting. Like you either innovate as a way you're evolving something, a product that's already there, right? If you look at what we did in our first business, no one was really creating custom courseware. We created that marketplace for technology organizations. We also created the first freelance, a certified training company, right? So as in we would sell other people ourselves as freelancers. At the moment, everyone was permanent to a company. So we created that marketplace and other people got into that marketplace afterwards. Even funny enough, the CEO of the company who I was working for that I left that got really upset and got really upset we were doing it ended up actually copying our business when he left the company as well. So not that it's a bad idea, it was a good idea. So I think going to then the pivot to I guess the third part towards it, right, which was Fuel. We were inspired more by seeing an answer to a problem that hadn't been solved yet, right? And I think actually it was when Flash 4 first came out, so an old bit of technology before videos. It was a bit of technology that now has been deprecated, but when I saw the technology, what I got excited by it was I could see how for the first time that you could take ideas from your mind, concepts that you try to explain, and visualize them in a far easier way. So if I have a way of explaining something, I could visualize that into an animation in a relatively low cost way.
So let's get a bit of context here.
Yeah,
The Fuel, we're talking about the early mid 90s here, when e-learning was
probably,
still
yeah,
pretty new.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
so you were very much at the beginning of that
Yeah.
phase. Yeah.
One of the grandfathers of the industry, I think, on that on that piece. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, before that, it was all everything was face-to-face training, pretty much, right? And digital learning wasn't really a thing outside of it. It just wasn't a thing, right? So we were one of the pioneers of e-learning, ourselves and a few other companies in the UK. But the bit I think that we were different on was rather than we saw e-learning as like maybe text and a picture on screen, we saw the ability to create animated media in a low cost way to allow people to understand concepts in a better way. So in my mind, when I'm explaining a technical concept at the time, there was normally an image or a picture or a story in my head and I'm trying to take that image and that visual, place it inside your head with certain words inside it that you can then see it, go, oh, I get it, right? I get it. So when we saw this piece of media flash at the time, we was like, oh my God, we're now able to draw what's in our mind and extract out into mind via a designer in this tool we can work with and script and create it. And within weeks or months, right, you've got a piece of digital learning that's rich. And we weren't the low cost guys. We were probably middle to end premium type stuff, but we were able to visualize explanations and reduce the time for people to understand concepts, and then with digital be able to get that out to a mass audience. And I think if I looked at the first, I think as you look at your story, you go, that was the client when you proved it right. And I think there was a part with British Telecom where we rolled out an e-learning course to 100,000 people with certain different variants for different individuals. And you think, okay, we've done it. We've done the distribution part. I would say there were still some challenges and other things which I think I could still look at it now today, and the reason for the next company we'll come to in a second, right,
Yeah.
was we making the change were happening. But the first problem we wanted to do was mass distribution of digital learning. I think you do that. I think done it, we cracked it, and then you want to, and then obviously you're out to go to market and to figure out how do you get another 50 companies you can sell that same concept to, and that's what Fuel really was, right? It started being a e-learning content production company to to big brands.
Okay, so earlier in the answer, you were talking about you found a solution to a problem that had been
Mm.
around. Have you ever, as an entrepreneur, sort of found a solution to a problem that people didn't have? If in the sense of you got very carried away with a piece of technology or something, and do you see you understand what I mean? Because
No,
you
I
have
think
to be client driven, don't you?
I
Respond.
don't. Well, I
Yeah,
don't
go on.
know. And it's like Steve Jobs used to say, right? If you go to your, or Henry Ford supposedly may have said or didn't say, the whole concept, if you go to your clients, they're always going to ask for faster cars, right?
Mm,
But if you break that down, what that means is if I go to any of my clients, generally, not always, right? But generally speaking, and we ask them, and if our product team asks them what to do, they'd ask them for a better version of our current product.
mm,
Can you update this? Can you refine that? Really, it's about evolving the idea they're going to have.
yeah,
Not many, right? Because maybe that they're in corporate rather than entrepreneurs, right? But I think not many people are going to come to you and say, "Can you invent a brand new category of product?" Because they haven't got that relationship with you. Their relationship with you is, "I've bought a category of product from you." And therefore, my conversation with it is, how do you improve that category of product? In our
yeah,
case, a learning management system or an LXP or an AI learning suite. Um, so I think you've got to separate that from the breakthrough things, right? What are the things where you evolve in the product, and you absolutely want to be client centric on that. You 100%, right? The clients will give you feedback upon how you make the better version of what you have, and I think it's super important that product teams and our teams really tune into that. That's slightly different to your iPhone, right, or
yeah,
your iPod. The iPod or the iPhone is created by internal entrepreneurialism,
mm,
right? It's solving a problem that people didn't know that they had, but was still a problem in the world. But people park those problems because they're too hard to get to, right? When we first started, doing translation on our software, our clients weren't asking for that, but we saw the problem was there, right? But it's like just because there are if you've been doing one way to, like I don't know, the car is you built a car in a one way of doing things, and all of a sudden somebody's inventing planes. I mean, it's a different dimension to think about travel, right?
yeah.
Travel's still the problem, but if there's no type of kind of a invention on planes, you're never going to think about that's how I get across the road to the other side. You're going to think about a better boat, right?
Yeah.
But somebody like then thought about, wow, we've got a transatlantic solution here. That's not a boat. That's get there faster, quicker. But it's not like the marketplace is screaming out for that, right? So I do think you've got to separate out the
Okay.
evolution from the breakthrough.
That's possibly the best answer to that question I've ever had, actually, because a lot of people kind of confuse those two things, or they just simply go down one road of, you've got
Mm.
to, talk to clients. So that's thank you for that. Now, this is in the context of you scaling Fuel, and so there's a lot of scaling going on, and eventually you sold to a US organization, as I understood it. What were the for you as a leader of the people you work with? What were the difficulties of scaling? I mean, obviously there was a demand, and there was a demand for you to scale, but did you find that a difficult thing? Because a lot of entrepreneurs do.
Well, I think when you scale, right, there's different elements of scaling, right? I think what we were able to do was to create a really cool product that people wanted and we were able to compete on. So from the sales and marketing side, I think we never really had a challenge on that. We were quite natural, I think, on that in terms of, the creativity, the quality of the product, those type of things, right? So I think we're able to grow the company successfully in that area. I think if I look back, right, to say where we could have been better, right, was probably on the operational efficiency. So if you look at it, were we running the business in the way that you're increasing the profitability, the efficiency, is our cost per course, in the right element? We did some smart things, right? So one of the things we did do, we were probably the first company that offshored. So, I was quite lucky at the time that I was married to my ex-wife who was Indian. So she helped me set up, an Indian office. So, but in my mind, I wasn't necessarily looking to do that as a pure cost efficiency side. I was able to produce the quality of product, at a level maybe that was other people couldn't do. And eventually other companies did that, and eventually Indian companies started actually selling themselves out. But at the time, I think I would say really the being as efficient as possible and allowing what you're spending to be spent in the right areas. So you're able to spend, and we were probably a very typical UK company, right? Where the innovation was hard, but American companies would focus more on sales and marketing, but maybe the quality of product wasn't as good. So I think the big lesson would be, which I'm trying to bring in now, back into Fuse, which is, how can we be as efficient as possible on our spend, so we're spending our areas on growth rather than on operations we shouldn't be.
Okay, so the business grew, you sold it. How did you know it was the right time to exit, or did they just come knocking on your door with an offer you couldn't refuse? I mean, so was it a sort of this is the right time, and was it always the objective actually to exit it, or was it just serendipity of meeting the right people and saying we want to make an offer?
No, I think, we went through the dot-com boom, so, but we survived it, right? Many people didn't, right? So I think as we got through the other side, we got some good investment and we grew really quickly, right? And then we continued to grow, but we had to change rapidly because, profitability became the number one thing versus growth is the number one thing, right? Which meant you had to literally pivot overnight when the market crashed pretty much overnight. And I think that when you change investors, I think there was a desire to exit at some point. And to be fair, I think at the time I was thinking about doing more of a management buyout, right? And to think, okay, can we bring some fresh investors in that were maybe, because the ones we had were good people, but they were like weren't really industry specific. So I thought if we could bring some different investors in, then maybe they can help us reinvest in the business to grow. So we were starting to have that conversations, but at the same time, I thought also, can we also start to think about an exit, right? So we started to target actually the company we sold to make sure we were winning deals against them to get onto their radar. But they came in a bit earlier than I thought, right? So they actually came in. It worked, but it probably came in a year earlier than I planned to. But they came in and said, look, you're obviously beating us. You're winning. Your product's better. We want to buy you, right? And I think at that stage, my partners were, wow, this is a lot of money on the table for us, right? We want to get that, right? And so I think at that point to say, well, if you guys really want to get out and this is your opportunity to exit, then let's all agree to that and let's do it in an amicable way. But I won't continue because the company that wants to buy us is in a market of compliance e-learning, and I don't want to spend my world in regulatory training, right?
Yeah.
So I get why it's good for you. So let's call it the end of the journey. Let's focus on get the sale and then go our different ways, and that's the way it worked out.
Okay, so at this point, then, so which year was this? Or like mid 2000s or late 2000s?
Yeah, late 2000s probably. Yeah.
Late 2000s. So suddenly, there you are, you've sold, and some people love it and some people hate it. At this point, did you immediately think, I've got this other idea, Fuse, or was there a gap in between where you kind of went off and sailed around the world, or did something
I
and
think
got?
I think there was some funny moments, right? There was, the team, because I had a great team and got on with people really well. And there was a guy who was from India, right? He was kind of he was married, it's like brother-in-law type thing, but it was my wife's sister's best friend's husband type thing, right? But he was a funny guy, right? And it was also, one of my guys, right? And I think when I walked past his desk the day of the sale, and he was like, Steve, look at this. And he had a big, fuel logo in it. And then he pressed the button and it came across there, the new company logo. I was like, yeah, traitor, right? So, but it was tough, right? It was tough when I saw them presenting and it wasn't my company and presenting to my team and it wasn't me anymore. That was a kind of a tough moment. Not tough, a weird moment. I think a week afterwards, right, when all of a sudden the pressure's off your shoulders, it was
Yeah.
like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually felt quite beautiful. Felt quite beautiful because you don't realize how much you're carrying on your shoulders because there is a massive responsibility to the people, to your clients, to all those type things towards it. And when that was gone, that felt really good for a while, right? And I don't think there was a craving. There wasn't a craving for me to start again. Well, let's be fair. I always knew I was going to start a business again, right? I didn't necessarily think it would be a breakthrough business, So when I did start again, I started doing a similar type of business that we did, right? Rather than going through the radical idea. But what I did know is, what I always felt was in my last company, what I did, it was the best of what you could do, but it still didn't quite work, right?
Mm.
So it didn't really solve the whole problem that I was trying to solve. It solved the distribution problem, but there was still this nagging thing in my head of, I can't get through one of those e-learning courses myself. And
Oh.
it's like my R&D director used to say to me, he goes to me, Steve, what we do is shit. It's the best
Yeah.
shit out there, but it's still shit. I thought that's a bit true, but harsh, right? And anyone that's gone through traditional e-learning courses and pressed that next button probably knows what I'm talking about. So in my head, there was always this nagging part to say, I haven't really solved the problem, right? I've only solved the distribution part, not the actual quality of the learning part towards it. So I was really interested in, that was still playing through my mind, right? And I had a period of time where I couldn't work for anyone. I couldn't work for anyone else. So that's when I started my charity. I started fuseschool.
Mm.
So and I was but the few school problem was I started creating e-learning courses for free to distribute across developing countries, mainly Africa, into schools that had PCs. And the problem there at the time was I thought was because I was reading a lot of entrepreneur and philanthropist books and met a lot of people that this is where I had kind of 6 months out. And the problem I thought that I could solve at the time was if you could, because I loved this TED video of kind of the hole in the wall type idea. So my concept was if I could teach people in developing countries how to use technology to learn anything,
Mm.
then they could become whatever they want to be, right? So how do I bridge that education gap? So my first part was, because I got involved in this charity who was selling PCs, and I thought, okay, I can help with the content in terms of it to teach MIT. So I did that for 6 months, and that was really cool, right? It was really cool, and we were in a couple of hundred schools, but the kids would only get access to it once a week for an hour,
Mm.
right? That
Mm.
was it. And then I was sitting down at an event in Senegal, and it was one of the education ministers of some country, and he said, "Look, I've listened to what you're doing, and it's really interesting, but it's a drop in the ocean. It's a drop in the ocean what you're doing. How do you solve the whole problem? How do you help the whole continent, right?
All
With
right.
with learning?
Okay.
How do how do you think bigger?" He challenged me to think bigger and to say, "I love what you're doing, but our problem is most of our teachers are not qualified. We have 30,000 teachers or some number that he said that have never taught the subject, have been qualified to teach the subject, that are teaching maths or geography, history. So you need to think bigger, solve the whole problem." And that was wonderful, right? That
Mm.
was a wonderful problem, right? That meant
Yeah.
that I went off and go, oh my God, he's right. With what we're doing, really genuinely to drop in the ocean. So it's another huge problem, right? And
Mm.
that's what then allowed me to put forward the solution to fuseschool, which has been phenomenal, right? So fuseschool still runs as our charity.
Yeah.
And that problem was, how do you scale secondary school education? I'm happy to tell you what that looks like if you think that's the appropriate next bit.
Well, yes, okay, but let me just say that, I mean, in a way, I'm guessing, I don't know this for sure, that it's kind of unusual that you have a sort of charitable thing that then grows into something else, something more commercial. A lot of people do the commercial thing and then think, well, we should be doing something, charitable alongside it. I
Hmm.
mean, but that was a deliberate thing. What? Because of the
Yeah.
circumstance of you having
No,
already
and also
solved something else.
no. Well, yeah, I think a combination. I think two things. I think one is when I married my wife, who's from India, from Bombay. I'd never really been outside of Europe before, right? And I hadn't really seen that level of poverty before. So I think there's a lot of people, it hit you, and you saw these little, kind of beggar children with big smiles on their face and totally gorgeous, and you're thinking, I wonder if I could do something, right? And you realize at that particular moment, I was still locked into a company, fighting hard, and doing what I could day to day. But that problem still stayed in the head, saying, how could you do something? So when the opportunity, I think when I sold my company, I couldn't work, it allowed me to then address that challenge, right? And think, okay, how could I get involved and how can I use this time I now have and some money I've now made to address that challenge and to get involved. So that's how we started. And that was those are the two catalysts for starting.
Okay, so check. We'll go on to the charitable thing now. I mean, I'm just out of curiosity. There's fuel and there's fuse. Were they deliberately similar names?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and even the branding, right? I mean, because it kind of works, right? So I think in the branding of the first company, even we used pink as a big brand, and it worked at trade shows, and I saw people's reaction when they stop and see the stand, and so
Yeah.
the ability to take that color, if you like, in the branding, I think as well.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the charitable side of things. Tell me about
Yeah, so again, obviously, it's always been a passion now since that moment. So once that education minister put the problem, into my head, it then went off and think, okay, we need to invent it, right? So I guess what I then did is I put together into London and put some of the smartest people I knew, and actually flew people in. I had guys from South Africa. Charles Jennings was there. Every smart person in a room to give them the problem. And I
that.
said, look, here's my 5 big problem statements that we got to try and solve this, right? How do I create the content in an affordable way? How do I make it high quality so kids want to engage and want to go through it? How do I distribute it, at scale in a way that is affordable? Because if they've got 10 million kids using it, which they are now, if I'm hosting that, right, it's going to cost me £1 million a year in hosting fees. So here's my problem statements. these are smart people. Can you figure it out for me? And kind of what came out of that was 50 more questions, not 50, not 5 answers. But it was good and bad, right? So I didn't really walk out of that session with a whole bunch of answers. But I did work out with, okay, I've got to go deeper to get towards it. And then over the following months, we start to solve the problems, right? The two bits we solved for, the first one was the content bit. So again, I was struggling and we were pioneering, it didn't work, pioneering didn't work, trying to find something in it. And I just couldn't find something to work. And actually one day this guy came into my office and it was showing me his product. And he showed me this animated video of a CEO talking about his strategy, and it was beautifully visualized. And I was like, oh my God, it must take you ages to script that with the CEO thinking of my production mechanism. He goes, no, you just sent me the audio clip and we put a visual layer on top. Oh my God, that's it, right? That's it. If I could just record the best teacher's explanation, I don't have to then spend loads of time with them. I could take the best explanation, post-produce that audio clip to be really concise and to the part, and then put a visual layer on top to make it easy to understand. And I spent a lot of time in between reading every book I could, because the other thing I wanted to try and do was to recognize there's a gap in solving that learning problem, right? So during that 6-month period, I was reading everything. I must have consumed, dozens of books, and every book I read recommended 5 other books. And I read that book. I was reading Scientific Minds, Scientific, everything I could do to try to learn how the brain works in order to create. I didn't know what the answer was to create something different, but I needed new domain knowledge to allow me to, like, as in, Einstein can't create relativity without some pretty good domain knowledge of maths and physics. I don't think I could have recognized or worked together with my team to have that breakthrough thinking without a different level of foundational knowledge, right? So I did everything I could and read everything I could and talk to everyone I could. I went on neuralistic programming courses for 5 days to learn NLP and Myers-Briggs, Carl Jung, everything towards it. So all of that helped, all of that domain knowledge helped with it. What comes from that, which is the creative moment, that when that person comes in, you go, oh my God, that's part of the solution towards it. So then we pioneered that bit, and eventually we were able to produce a bit of learning for Sainsbury's, which I think was just a test case in a day, right? Where you could interview the person to get that great explanation out, and then to visualize it in a way that goes, oh my God, that's such a better way for me to understand what you're explaining than if you just talked about it or something else. So we solved that bit, and then the second bit that was really, really interesting was we didn't know how to distribute it, right? Because we're thinking, well, how do you solve the distribution piece? Because it's going to cost so much if you have Amazon serve and everything else. And then one day there was, I think, the head of YouTube for Google, Africa, was in the office and goes, and I don't know why, but someone we met, and he said, why didn't you just put all the videos on YouTube and distribute for free? You could even put advertising revenue on it, and you get paid a bit of money back. We were like, no, we would have thought of that. Well,
great idea.
I mean, looking around at the people in the room we had at the time, right, and we're like, we got really smart people. I can't believe we didn't just think of that. So YouTube became, we were a really early YouTube content creator, and we've now got like pretty much 1 million subscribers, more or less, 5 to 10 million kids who use it, every year, and people do license it in other platforms as well. But now we have those 1,000 videos, which is, and what's been beautiful, right? To maybe just complete that story, what's been beautiful, right? In my kids' school in the UK, when we were in there and before, that I'll go to the school and my kids would come back and say, Daddy, they're using your videos in chemistry and science. And now we've moved into Portugal, and it's an English school in Portugal. There's schools also getting them to do their homework using our videos. Right. So it was when you get those moments and you're thinking, okay, it's beautiful and it's real.
So Fuse takes off initially through a sort of charitable sort of initiative, and then grows its own wings kind of commercially and starts around. Now, no journey is completely smooth. I'd be interested. You've talked about one sort of breakthrough moment, but was there a particular moment where you thought, yes, we're really breaking through now, or was that it? And also the second part of that question is, were there any major bumps on the road along the way where you thought, not sure if this is working?
I think on Fuse, then we had a different problem statement, right? So the problem statement I saw when I wanted to get back in the corporate industry, again, eventually I think I saw what the answer was looking like for my problem, right? The problem I looked at before, which was, how do you make engaging content for corporates or kids, right? And the Fuse score allowed me to think it through from the angle of kids. But the problem still exists at the corporate. So I now had half the answer. I think, okay, I can now see, and then therefore I can now pretty much see that if I could create a corporate environment that used this type of bite-sized content, distributed, interviewed from experts, rolled out through a YouTube, LinkedIn style platform, right? So my idea initially at the time of Fuse was combining the concept of YouTube and LinkedIn for corporates with bite-sized content created from both ourselves, but also user-generated content from internal companies. So that was the idea. And I think that, again, there was a really funny moment, right? When one of our early clients, Phones for You at the time, were rolling it out. I mean, they rolled out to a few thousand people, and we looked at the analytics and they got like 5,000 views on the analytics, and they're creating these videos and the people are talking and they're sharing their expertise. And I was like, and I had my team around me at the time. But by the time we'd already been funded and had our, I think, Series A funded at that time. But I funded it myself to begin with. And then I think when we wanted to scale it up, then we brought a funder in. And then I'm not sure we had the investment at that time, but when it was working, right, you can see the analytics and see the video content being created and Phones for You sharing best practices amongst themselves. And it was like, oh my, and I said, guys, look, it's working, it's working. I got really excited, it's working. And then what was really weird, everyone's looking at me going, well, of course it's working, it's why we're all here, right? And there's a bit of you like, oh yeah, sorry, because as an entrepreneur, you don't know 100% your idea is going to work, right? You've got to
Yeah.
convince everyone else the idea is going to work. And there was that little bit of reawakening of like, oh shit, just put the mask back up that you're supremely confident of doing that. So I think up until that point, I
Mm.
never really knew the idea was going to work. Right,
Yeah.
I think there's that point. So I think the reality of until you actually see the product work and the joy you get, and there is the moment when you see it working as you intended, you're like, oh my god, and that's I think for an entrepreneur one of the euphoric moments, right, to get towards it, and then obviously the commercial bit to actually now take that idea that works and make it into a great business.
Right. And what about the bumps in the road? Are they sort of, have you had moments where you've thought, actually, we tried to do this and then that didn't work very well and so on? And did you learn something from those?
Yeah, I think you learn from every mistake, right? And if you don't, you miss the opportunity. I think the people that don't learn, the people that blame other people as a first point, which is a natural, human thing to do, right? But I think anyone that automatically blames someone else misses that opportunity to learn. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn, right? So,
Mm.
and if you blame someone else, you're probably going to make the same mistake over and over. Versus
Mm.
if you accept the fact you've made a mistake, you have the opportunity to grow and to learn from that and not repeat it and try
Yeah.
something different, which may or may not work next time, right? But at least you shouldn't be repeating the same mistake. Hopefully, you're repeating a new mistake or it works. I, I think the whole funding investment thing has been a journey, right? So I think when it works best is as an entrepreneur when you're still in control
Yeah.
of your vision, right? I think as soon as you lose that, right, you either lose ball control or voting rights, right? And other big voices or investors that have a word in there that think that they have a better understanding of what the product should be or what the market puts you in and plays politics in the background. Imagine you go back to the classic story with Steve Jobs, right? When that's
Yeah.
how he got kicked out of his company, and probably Elon Musk at his first company, where other investors think they're smarter. Some people, sometimes you have great investors, right, that are there with you and back you and so forth, and other ones that are maybe they think they're smarter or they know or they've done a degree or half a degree or something and know. And I think that's where when we've got it wrong a bit and lost our way.
Mm. So I still see you at all the trade shows. You're there
Mm.
with the pink and everything, and you're still there and you're busy and you're bustling and you're part of the team and so on. Is that where you are at your best? Because, I mean, there's different ways of growing a company. There's ones where you are still in there sort of stirring the pot, and there's others of people who would actually just like for people to visit the Fuse stand and then they say, oh, the company was founded by Steve Dineen, and they'll go, who's Steve Dineen? Like if you become almost like an invisible, the company goes on without you. And is your objective to just do things that are stimulating and fun, and if that means being on a stand, being on a stand, or is it to actually kind of almost like the cat in Alice in Wonderland that just sort of slowly disappears and doesn't need to be there because something's got an entity? What's your motivation?
I'm driven by success.
Mm.
And whatever the route for that, right? So I want the company to be, which is the idea. I want the company to be as successful as it can be, and in every way that's defined, right? Commercial success, success of the product, success of the customers. I get joy. I get genuine joy when you see your customers use your product in a way that they love, and your clients being. When you see a client that is passionate about it, I take joy from that. I take joy from commercial success and thinking we're a good, profitable company that's growing in the right way, and that our shareholders are happy, and that I'm giving to our shareholders what the reason why they invested. I think that's true, and therefore my role in that is whatever that role needs to be at the time in order to help on that side. So sometimes that's going to be to take a step back. And sometimes that's going to be at the forefront. I mean, on a personal level, I've obviously built up, I've been in the industry for a long time and therefore have kind of brand recognition inside of that. So
Mm.
going to those stands and being present on it helps, right? Because I'm not there to do every pitch or demo. I'm actually there as an overflow, but I'm there a little bit towards, so, but I also want the team to make sure that they're maxed out. So there's a little bit of, are we making sure we're maximizing our investment? And what are these trade shows are quite big investments. So there's a little bit of that to make sure we're maxing investment, and anything we could think about, we learn from to do that. But in terms of the, let's say, demos and time towards it, I'm more, if the stand's too busy, you'll probably then see me, which it always is, right? So our stand's always too busy. Why it's always, when people come up to say hi, I'm always already talking to someone. So we need, it's great to always be busy, right? And that's maybe something you have to work towards. How do we not rely upon me to be the backup person,
Yes.
in terms of that?
Now I know you in the professional sense, and you throw in things to the kind of conversation of, I read up everything there was to know about this subject or that subject, things like that. Do you switch off, or are you always thinking about the business?
Yeah. I think if you spoke to my wife, we have a joke about it. So I don't know if you ever watched that I can't remember the book, when the guy wrote the book about the guy who's an Arsenal fan
Oh,
who's
Nick
always talking about
Hornby.
Arsenal. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
when and the book, when he goes, "What are you thinking about?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm talking about the business and the metaverse." Really? No, I'm talking about Arsenal, right? So so he's always thinking about Arsenal. He's always thinking about whether Arsenal's going to win the league rather than his job. And with my wife, the same thing. She goes, "What?" She sees me, my head going, "What are you thinking about, Arsenal?" But really, Arsenal is our code word for I'm thinking about something in Fuse. It's look. I think if you can do something that is a passion, right, and you'd be crazy to start a business, I think, that isn't something you're genuinely interested in. I'm passionate about the problem, and I think the people in my core team are all interested in the problem. We all love the problem. Right. So
Yeah,
the problem I'm trying to solve 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, today, tomorrow, it's the same problem, right? And I think I'm in love with that problem. And I'm always excited upon ways to solve that problem and bring it, and at the same time help run a company, right? That needs guidance, that needs leadership, that needs me to coach, mentor, train people, towards that, build the right team, the right team around me. I think there's that. Yeah, hopefully that gives some flavor to that question.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it does. It does. It's funny you mentioned flavor because you've got this role. You now describe your role as chief storyteller, and of flavor. And then I've seen you taking us through chicken stir fry dishes, ice cream. Yeah, are these like, I mean, where are these ideas coming from you? Or is it just suddenly let's do ice cream and sort
A
of
bit,
rotate?
bit both,
What's
a
going on
bit
there?
both.
So
I've got a great creative team. So the guy called Ryan
yeah,
McBride, who I've worked with for years, and it's really interesting, Ryan, because he was one of the first guys that we brought on board in education, who didn't come from an education background. He came from a film media background, right? Which is, I purposely thought that was really interesting, because I wanted learning to go from, traditional kind of didactic education and sequential learning to something that was more story based, engaging, interesting. So having him on board, and I think that a lot of those videos is probably a collaboration of myself and the creative team, where one of us has an idea. And I think the ice cream one was my idea, because when I was going to the ice cream shop with my kids, and I was just amazed when you could start to design your ice cream, right? And I was like, oh my God, that's kind of the same metaphor for what we're trying to do with Fuse, right? You can design the experience for all these different options towards it, so it's not kind of one flavor. So sometimes I think I'm looking at the industry and I'm inspired by something, and I'm an ADHD person towards it. So naturally, there's probably, with neurodiverse people, right, your mind is working in a slightly different way, so these different patterns. And I think you look at a lot of tech entrepreneurs, there's probably a lot of tech entrepreneurs that are ADHD, especially in the AI world, right, where you're having to think even faster and to figure out how things change.
were you diagnosed ADHD? I mean, and when was that? Was that early on, or was that more recently? Or
No, so back in the story, so it was when my first boss I had, and when he actually then ended up being my COO in Fuel, so brilliantly. And he came in one day and he said, "Hey, look, take this as a compliment. I've just got my kid's just being diagnosed with this thing called ADHD. I don't know if you heard about it. I hadn't even known it was a thing back then, right?" And he gave me a book to read. He said he said when my kid was first diagnosed, I was really concerned by it, right? Thinking, oh my God, it's a bad thing that he's got this deficit thing, right? But then he said he started to look and read the book, and he said, actually, God, that's Steve. And then he said once he realized it was like you, I was actually, because we had a great relationship, but he thought that it's a good thing, not a bad thing, right? And then he said, look, but you also might get some, some things right. But when I read the book, I was like, oh my God, that explains so much. And then from that, I then went and got diagnosed, and it was told I had ADHD, which was a huge benefit, right? Because then you realized that certain things you do which are different to other people,
yeah,
both good and bad. I think it isn't because there's something wrong with you, right? It's just that you're wired differently to other people. And therefore you can start to be more cognizant of choices on the things that, instead of reacting to a moment, you can say, okay, do I want to react to that moment, or is that my ADHD kicking in and I can choose to do something different?
Right. Finally, we want to give our listeners the confidence they need to succeed. And drawing on your experiences, I know you said you came from a background of entrepreneurs, so to a certain extent, there was a natural kind of thing sort of going on, or inherited thing going on there. But what guidance would you offer someone perhaps who hasn't had that background, who's maybe either thinking of launching or developing their first business?
I think things like this podcast probably are great, right? Again, I think what I really lacked is someone to learn from. And there was nowhere to really to learn where you're going. Whereas these days, I think podcasts like here, AI tools and so forth, I think the barriers to learn the technical skill to be an entrepreneur are far lower than they have to be. You don't have to start huge, right? You don't need to go and conquer the world in the first part towards it, but finding a problem and finding it to do it in a way that's affordable, I think is super interesting. But you've still got to find the problem, right? I think you can't really be an entrepreneur until you find a problem that's worth challenging, and then you've got to make sure that no one else has already solved it, right, and solves it in a better way than you already do. So, and I think in my first business, I really felt that I needed a partner, because I think having someone to bounce off, I think, was good. I think in the second business on Fuse, I felt less that I felt more stronger, more confident that I didn't need to necessarily have that. I need to have good people around me, but I didn't necessarily need to have that. Whether that's right or wrong, I think in an ideal world, right, my maybe lesson from that would be, it would have been great to have a partner that balanced me in both businesses, right? So, and again, I look at friends of mine that have been really successful, who are similar to me. They've normally got a number two, right, or a partner that's maybe doing the other bit. So for me, the operational pieces, right, and are there's going to be people that are better than me at that, and to find someone that is really strong at that. And I think that early stage, if you can find someone that complements you rather than the same as you,
Mm.
and you're really good at both things, and you're happy at that side, and you are partners towards that, I think that's great. And also to recognize what you are good and bad at. So even if it is doing it by yourself, what are the areas that you can lean upon with advisors, with guidance, with other people, I think is key as well.
And what a great way that was to finish the interview, because it showed that there's an intensity to Steve Dineen's thinking that really comes through in this conversation. You can hear it in the speed of the ideas, the connections between technology, education and storytelling, but also in the restless curiosity underneath it all. You see, Steve doesn't just seem interested in building businesses, he seems deeply interested in solving problems. And I also found it fascinating hearing him talk about learning itself, not just as a sort of business category, a thing to do, but as a lifelong obsession that has shaped his ventures, charitable initiatives, and ultimately the way he sees the world. So perhaps that's the thread running through this whole conversation: curiosity combined with action, thinking deeply, deciding quickly, learning constantly, and having the courage to move before everything feels fully certain. So thank you, Steve, and thank you to all our listeners and for the great feedback we're getting on the show. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast, look for me, Trevor Meriden, or our business Merriborn at merriborn.co.uk. And until next time, thanks for listening.